Hi, I'm Nicole from Great Photo Tutorials, and today I'm going to show you how easy it is to do HDR photography. So why do we take HDR photos? It seems like an awful lot of effort, and it is a little bit of effort until you get going. But the reason for it is to make sure that we get all of our exposures correct, which is more than the camera can see normally. So our eyes can see, the details in the whites, like back here in the snow, and we can also see, the shadows and the details. But the camera can't see that much. It can, today's not a bad day. The light's pretty good. But normally, in a bright situation, when you've got bright light areas and dark shadow areas, the camera just can't take in all of that detail and give it to you on the photo. Your eyes can see it, but the camera can't see that much dynamic range. So we'll take the shots and it'll give us a merged photo when we put it through the app, and what we'll get is all of the details in those shadows and the highlighted areas that otherwise would have been blown out or too dark. So easy peasy, really. What I love using HDR photography for is realistic photos, and I know HDR, you've seen a lot of those really unrealistic photos, but it will give you a very more realistic photo in a lot of circumstances because you're getting what you saw, not what the camera saw. So you're getting the details that you saw when you looked at that amazing scene, and it also gives you brilliant texture and colour. So all we need to do is take 3 photos, one underexposed, one correctly exposed, one overexposed. So what those over and underexposed photos are going to do are make sure that we get enough detail out of those shadows and the highlights that would otherwise be over or underexposed in that correctly exposed image. You get that? That's a bit confusing. Not really. I'm going to show you how to do it. So let's have a look at how to set up the camera for HDR. First of all, make sure you're on aperture priority. All I do is simply look at my gauge here on the top. You can see it's on the center at the moment. And with the dial, I've got my dial down there. I simply have to dial down to 1 or 2 stops and I'll take the shot. Then I'll dial to the next, next, or as many times as I want for the amount of photos that I'd like to take over and underexposed. So, and that will give me these shots that are all different exposures. You might prefer the AEB bracketing, which would be in your settings somewhere. So grab your user guide, find out where it is in your camera, and this is how I set mine up. I'll just go there. This is the control setter, and I'll just I've got the choice of adjusting my exposure first and then choosing what bracketing sequence I'd like. So that here is 5 shots to 1 stop apart. So 2 stops under, 1 stop under, correctly exposed, 1 and 2 over. The other option you might have in your camera, which I do have, is an actual HDR mode. Now make sure that's not a HDR style photo like they do have on the iPhones. This is actually going to take the 3 photos still at different exposures so that they can be merged. So make sure it does actually take 3 shots, not just enhance the photo HDR style. So there you go, easy. Grab your user guide, get going. Okay, so now we've got our images ready to go and we'll download them. So good practice, make sure the cap goes back on the camera. Make sure your settings get put back to neutral, because if you've finished off with an overexposed image, and you go and take another shot and forget to check. I do that every now and then. So make sure all of your settings are back to neutral so you're ready for just standard photography. Okay, let's get these onto the computer. Okay, so we've got the images uploaded to the computer, and I've pulled up the 3 that I've chosen to go through with you before I upload them, just to have so you can have a look at what we've done. So first of all, here is the underexposed image. So you can see it's just dark everywhere, but the sky's a good colour. There's also no areas of the snow that are blown out, so that what will be blown out in these other images is correctly exposed there, so that's going to help. Then we've got the correctly exposed image according to the camera. These little areas are a little bit burnt out. The sky is washed out, though the main tree area is fairly well exposed, but we've got this area down the bottom here where it's just black, you can't see any of the detail. So perfectly exposed is not perfectly exposed in every area of the scene. So there we have the overexposed image. You can see where it was underexposed previously. We can see all the detail now in the tree trunk, but everything else is just a washout. Another thing, this photo was I actually took this just after we did the video from a slightly different angle, and I handheld it. So if we just have a look, you can see between one and the other, the movement in the tree. So you can see as still as I tried to be. I've got those two images are pretty close to being exactly on top of each other. This one and that one isn't exactly still, so they're slightly different. So therefore we're going to have to do a tick a box when we upload to Aurora HDR, but we'll go through that right now. So here we are on the platform. If you're new to Aurora, there's some great video tutorials, the user guide, and presets, more presets. We're going to talk about presets today. Luminar is an amazing editing program, and you can easily flick into Luminar and back through Aurora, so it's very, very handy to do your final tweaks on your image by going backwards and forwards. It's a great tidy workflow to have, going from one program to the other without having to close one down and open up the other. It's lovely. Okay, so let's open those images. I've got them pre-selected. There we go. So I just hold down the command button and click 3 and open them, and there we go. I'm on a Mac, by the way, so if you've got PC, whatever button you hold down to to select more than one item is what you'll do. This little tick down here, alignment, that's what we need to tick because I had handheld the camera, and you don't want Aurora to be, putting the frames exactly on top of each other. We want them to be picking the details in the scene and overlaying from that. Personally, I do it anyway, even when I do have the tripod, because you just don't know when you get a little bit of a sway or a nudge happening just from hand holding and clicking. It's just, to me, it's always safer. Tick that alignment box. Then don't forget this little icon here, because we have a few more options. Ghost reduction, really important if anything was moving, whether that was people wandering around or flags or trees. This is what we had, was lots and lots of wind in the trees. So this is going to help not create a situation where, as the trees were moving, that we're going to have them all looking like ghosts, because you've got 3 different versions. So what Aurora does there is it'll pick whichever one I choose. I've chosen the correctly exposed middle photo as the main image. So if there are objects there that it picks up as having moved, it will attempt to eliminate the 2 other images and just use the one from that middle image. And we're doing a medium amount of ghost reduction. I should probably make that high on this image. If you don't have anything moving whatsoever, don't tick that. It just makes, whether you tick it or not, the consequence only seems to be that it takes a little bit longer to merge those images together if you tick that box and you didn't need to. So not a major, but really important to tick if there was moving objects or anything not perfectly still in your image. Chromatic aberration, if you have those terribly discolorations in the high contrast areas of your image, it happens sometimes on really expensive lenses too, but you know, it can be a lens issue, but it can also just be anywhere where you've got a high contrast area, like in other words, something dark next to something very light. That line between the two, you might have a bit of chromatic aberration, and here it'll attempt to get rid of that for you, so very handy, very handy. We can also do more of that in the editing process, but hey, is it going to do it for me in the beginning? Fantastic. So from there, we're ready to make our HDR. Now, I do shoot RAW, and I would recommend that. But if you're not ready to go there and you don't feel confident flicking over from JPEG to RAW, that's okay. Start with JPEG, and if your camera can actually shoot JPEG and RAW together, why don't you try just for a little while shooting both, and then you've got those RAW files that you can play with here in Aurora HDR, which is always going to work in your favour because there's a lot more data in a RAW file to work with. And in fact, with RAW images, I quite often can get all of the detail out without even doing HDR. So when you've got to do quick editing, I find RAW is always the way to go. Okay, so here we have our workspace. So here is the basic image merged. If you'd like to see what it was prior, that's like the before Aurora got to it. And here is the after, so you can see there's a lot more detail and balance in the light and detail throughout the whole image. So there you go, before and after. So across the top here we've got our zoom tool. Zooming in is really important, especially when we are looking for things like chromatic aberration. So I'm not actually seeing anything here. This sort of area here would be a typical classic area where you would have those bright purpley green lines on either side of that dark branch, even though it's blurry. There's nothing there though, so it's doing the job beautifully. And I'm not going to have to worry too much about that at all. So lovely. Okay, so zoom tool, especially before you save your image at the end, I would go to 100% and just scan the whole image for any issues. This is your previews, your reset and your history. So when you've done a few edits, and you might have gone and done some custom edits down this side as well, you'll have a history of it all here, so you'll know what you've done, and that's if you, especially when you want to undo something. This is the crop tool, very handy. Sometimes I'll crop in the beginning because the framing will be irritating me, but otherwise it's probably easier just to do that right at the end when you've finished doing everything. So it's the crop tool, we'll do that later. Actually, I don't think I need to crop this image, but you can crop your images here. These little orange icons are your view settings for your panels. So this one at the bottom, that's the presets that we'll be playing with. The sidebar, they're all your manual adjustment tools. Here you've got your histogram, layers, and your information that you can view or not view. So layers, I recommend you get into layers, and the filters we'll be looking at a little bit as well. But first and foremost, the amazing presets. So right from the get-go, really all you need is presets. This is really why I wanted to do this video, because with the click of a button, and I've just done the realistic basic preset, and it's just given that little bit more oomph to the image, and it just looks beautiful. I just think really at the end of the day, it's fantastic. I would be happy just with that. So there we go. Job done and video over. No, we'll do a little bit more though. just to show you what Aurora HDR can do. So if I click on the categories here, you'll see what I mean by presets. We've got all sorts of great presets that come just installed, and then you've got also extra presets which you can install from various people, which I've installed a few, and I just use them all the time as a starting point. Now, the most important thing I think to show you why I even use the presets, even though I do this professionally, I'll just go to the landscape presets and just have a look at some of those. So landscape enhanced, that would be a classic one I would like to look at, because I like, you know, vivid enhanced images. So you can see the difference again between that one's a little bit flatter. Click on this one, you can see the image got a lot more intense. Soft and airy, you can see it's just got that glow all over it. It's not really my look. HDR, this is getting into that sort of HDR photography that people don't like so much, so it starts to look very painterly or not very realistic anymore, and it really enhances the textures, and sometimes, you know, it can look fantastic. I don't think it looks terribly good when you've got lots of texture and detail like this. It's a little bit over the top in my mind, but you know, each to their own. If it's the sort of look that you love, go for it. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. You've also got, you can see down here the slider, so that's the opacity of that whole preset. So you can like the sort of look, and you may not like it to be so intense. You can just take that slider and reduce it slightly so it's not so intense. So, you know, on top of having a whole bundle of presets, you can adjust the intensity of each preset as well. So just click on a few more here so you can see the amazing options. Warm highlights. Now, I love warming up a photo, but that's a little bit too warm for me. So you could slide that down too. So see how quickly you can have an amazing image just with a couple of clicks of a button, and you'd be done. But what I'm going to show you though, just going a little bit further, and how much, you know, how we've got total control of the image, and I haven't seen this anywhere with other presets. We are going to just go to the realistic, back to the basics, but you'll see here down in the column of tools that some of them are in orange now. They are the ones that are used in this preset. So in other words, you can click on anything and adjust it. So for example, there's a slight tweaking here in the top and bottom tuning. Top and bottom tuning is, you know, it works really well when you've got a scene with sky, or the whole top section is sky and the bottom section will be something else. That's a classic example of using this, this editing option here. But because we've got this tree going straight through the top and bottom, it's certainly, it's not a necessary piece to this edit. So I could just totally reset and take that out altogether, because it's not really doing anything, or in theory it shouldn't be doing anything terribly that I need. A polarizing filter is another interesting one. Obviously the sky here isn't, you know, showing up terribly well, and the polarizing filter works really well on sky. So I'll just show you how to see as I'm sliding that filter that the sky is getting darker and darker. Now if I go back up to, I've just pulled that filter all the way over to 100%. Now I'm going to go and have a look at the image at 100%. So in other words, going to 100% is really important if you're going to print. But if you were just going to share on social media, and you know, it's not going to be a very large image, you probably wouldn't notice things like this, but that's just bad. And that's been caused by the polarizing filter. So in some instances it will work well, some instances it won't, and in most instances 100% is never the way to go. So with everything in HDR editing, if you want to keep your image looking realistic, just be careful with everything. Be gentle with all of the tools. So we can very easily bring that up a little bit without going all the way. and it will help with the bringing a little bit more colour out in the sky. So there we go. Now, two things that I love in images is when the shadows are not looking blue. Like quite often in your images the shadow will have a colour cast to it, and this is looking pretty good actually, so I'm really happy with that. Some of the presets that I could choose would create a much more bluer tinge to it, but this preset is doing a really nice job of not causing that colour cast. Another thing I really like is when there is lovely details to just enhance them slightly, and also it just gives like almost a three-dimensional look to the image. So what the part of that image which is the most important, you can really bring that out and really make it pop by just locally enhancing that area rather than causing that effect over the whole image. So what I would be doing here is just painting in a few more enhancements, and the way to do that is with layers. So we're going to, it's a little bit advanced, but it's a little bit of a treat to show you just how much you can do with this. Obviously you know now all you need to do is go in, find a preset that you love, and you'll have an amazing image. And when you go through some of these sections underneath here on the sidebar, that you can adjust those as well. But with layers, so what we're going to do is put another layer on top of the image so that we're leaving the image as is, and we're just going to add the edits to the top layer. So okay, so click the layer button, add a new adjustment layer. So lots of different options here, definitely more advanced videos that we'll go through those, but for now just a new adjustment because we want to adjust some of the parts that we have in here. So now just on the adjustment layer we are going to paint. So I'm going to click on the brush. See, we've got these options here as well, but brushing in is going to be a bit of fun. And now we've got our brush happening here. So we've got these extra options that have appeared up here too. We've got the mask. We can paint in or we can erase. So I'm just going to paint in some enhancements in here. Quite frankly, looking at the image, it might even be more than we need, but just to give you an example of what we can do, first of all, I'm just going to brush over that area that I know I want to enhance, and nothing's happening there, of course, but you can see when I click on the mask button, that's to view the mask, you can see I've gone over, and where it's red is where I'm going to be making some changes. So it's not always important to paint in the lines like you want the kids to in their books, but I think softly is nice. I'm going to erase just that little bit because I know from experience if I was to increase the colour of the tree, it will also increase the colour on what's white, and that will make it look blue. So I'm going to make sure I don't have that. It's a bit fun. And we can paint it in and paint it out and paint it back in and paint it back out, so if you make a mistake it's all fine. There we go. I'll just see. Yeah, I messed a bit up there, haven't I? There we go. Oh, a few bits. Yeah. Okay. Right. Now if this was going to be a gallery print, I would be spending a lot more time getting this right. Maybe not right now, but definitely after I'd made the edits and decided that they were good, I might go back and fine-tune the borders, the boundary areas of those of the edits. So that's what we're going to have a look at, tweaking just that little bit more. Okay, so now I'm thinking, let's have a look at the structure. You can see if I pull it all the way up that it is taking it more like those HDR look presets. It was a bit, whoa, over the top. And now this is one thing too, once upon a time when I first got into HDR, I thought this was amazing and every image that I edited was over-edited. Until I sort of got used to the look, and then I would look back at my images and go, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? And let yourself go through that process if that happens. It's, just enjoy playing with this. It's just such a wonderful tool. But you'll see over time that what you like and your taste will change and it'll mature over time. So these days I still like amazing, vivid, in-your-face photos. I just don't like them over-edited like I used to when I first got into it. So that's one thing. The other thing too is do your edits and then go away, have a cuppa, or go away, save it, come back another day and have another look, because coming back and looking back at your images with fresh eyes is really important. I find that if I sit here for half an hour, and sometimes on a really important image I can be editing for hours on one particular image, your eyes get funny, and what you think you're seeing is I know it's a mind, and your eyes start to get all really fuzzy, I think, and I really need to stop sometimes, go away, and then come back later, and later is quite often not that day, it's another day, come back another day, and revisit with fresh eyes. So I highly recommend doing that as well. So anyway, back to the image. I'm liking that little bit of extra detail, and we can actually, if you look at the little eye icon here on the side too, you can just see your before and after edits. There you go, it looks a bit softer. Put it back on, it looks sharper. So I'm liking that. It's not too much, but what else would I like to do? I'm thinking a little bit of colour might be good, and I'd like to talk about two things here too, colour and exposure. So I'll just open these two up. So we're going to look at colour and we're going to look at exposure. Now this is just basic editing training on any editing program that you might use or app. I tend to stay away from exposure and I tend to stay away from saturation. So, and why that is they are brutal. They're just brutal. So it takes a hell of an image for me to want to adjust the exposure. Rather than the exposure, tweak the highlights and shadows. So what the highlights will do, and I shouldn't be playing with this on the adjustment layer, but we could, yes we might. Okay, so the highlights will just affect the lighter areas. You see how it just brightened up the whiter part of the tree trunk, and as I bring it down, it pulls it back down. So a much more gentle and natural way to affect the light and dark in an image is to handle it with the highlights and shadows rather than exposure. You'd automatically think exposure is the way to go. It's not. It's too harsh. Shadows is something I am, literally every image I think that I take, I'm doing a bit of a tweak with the shadow and the highlights. So normally the shadows will be used to bring detail back in, so to lighten the shadows, and usually with the highlight button we'll be pulling that down so that you're not having areas that are too light. That's not necessary in this one here though, obviously, but when I've got a scene with nice puffy clouds in the sky, or the snow, or anything that's white or light, I'm quite often and very often pulling that bar down a little bit just to try and pull some detail back into it. And that's where too I'm always very careful with my exposure to start with. Another reason why Aurora HDR is an amazing product to use for images you know, with the high dynamic range, you just can't get the detail in, you know, all of it in the highlights and the darks. And once it's blown out, you know, this pulling your highlights back in isn't always going to work. If it's totally overexposed, nothing's going to save that image. But if it's just a little bit too light, you'll use your highlights to pull it back down and get some detail back in. If it's totally overexposed, nothing can help you. So exposure is important. Highlights and shadows helps you to tweak that image, and you need to try and get some balance back into it. Right, okay, that's exposure. Now down to colour. Saturation, brutal. And I'll show you how it's just... I'm not sure how often I would actually use saturation at all. If anything, I'd probably use it to pull colour out rather than to put colour in. So, but vibrance, this is the key here, is using vibrance rather than saturation. It's just a much more gentle and subtle way to put that colour back in to an image when it comes out flat. And most of my images, they look flatter than what I saw on the day when I was looking at the scene. So I'm always adding a bit of vibrance, mostly always. So I'm liking a little bit more colour there because these lovely alpine trees have got great colour. Okay, so I'm just going to have a look at the before and after with the colour. I can go a bit further with that, I think. Oh, that's too much, and you can see how it's bleeding into, here we go. See how the snow's become all blue. I don't want that much vibrance anyway, so. Okay, all right, I might just zip up that colour contrast a little bit too. So really at the end of the day, there's no rules and regs because every image is so totally different to the next. So, you know, whereas I think I know my favourite preset and I'll go to it, you know, one image after another, and then there'll be another image the next day and I'll think I'm going back to that favourite preset and it's just going to be a really quick edit. And it's a totally different image. Those presets don't work like I thought they would, and it's all just about, you know, the layout of the image, the textures in the image, the colours and the contrasts and all of the elements and principles of that photo that you just sometimes, you never know until you experiment with a few presets what you can do with that image. And that's why I love the presets so much. They are the starting point for every photographer. So one other thing you can do too is save your filters. So down in the bottom far right hand corner here, I can save this preset as my favourite tree preset, and click it as a preset, and it will save it in my user presets. So there it is down there, my favourite tree preset. If I'm doing a lot of the same sort of image, or if I've got a series of images from the same photo shoot, so handy just to save that preset because you know you've got a lot of the similar elements in every image, and you can just go bang, 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 and hopefully with very little or no tweaking, you'll have all of your images done very quickly. So there you have it, Aurora HDR, wonderful, wonderful program. Also from here we can flick into Luminar or any other apps that you might have, and then you'll bring it over into the other program, doing your edits, any further editing there, and then you can bring it back into Aurora. One last thing is on saving. So saving and exporting are two different things. When I am finished and I'm done, you can see all of my history there. I want to save all of this because I might just want to tweak it one day, or I might think, oh, I should have had a look at putting a vignette around, maybe that would have looked great. You know, these things happen, so I'll always save the image. But you'll notice, see here, It's an MPAUR2 file. So that's not for viewing, that's your working file. And I'll just save it to my desktop. So that from there you can go straight back in here and continue anything. When you want to have an image that you're dying to share on social, or you want to go and print, you need to export, don't save. You export out of the program and you save yourself a JPEG. Normally it will be a JPEG. So here we go to export and give it a name. You can sharpen, you can resize. So if I was just doing social media, or you just don't need something that big for social media. That's pixels, 5,696 pixels on the long edge, which is what it is straight out of the camera. For social media, you probably really only need a very small image. Quality doesn't need to be high either, but I'll save that. It'll look, when you save things to Facebook, they crunch it down anyway. So, but you might have your favourite way of saving certain images for social media to get the best out of it. So there you go. So now we have, here we have the image saved. So remember that, export to get your JPEG that you're going to share with the world because you're so proud of the beautiful image you've created. And save, to save all of the work that you've done so that you can come back and edit it later if you need to. So there you have it, Aurora HDR. I've tried a few different HDR programs. Aurora HDR is by far the best. It just does the best job at merging and putting everything together and giving you the most amazing options. So if you love the idea of creating beautiful images with Aurora HDR, grab the link at the bottom, use the free trial, grab the discount code, join our free Facebook group and ask any questions. And you shouldn't use it in high wind.